Welcome to Sharp Football Analysis. Today, Freeman and I are going to discuss Isaac TeSlaa, Devaughn Vele, and the best waiver ads for Week 14 of the fantasy football season. So make sure you stick around. What is up, everybody? This is Sharp Football Analysis. My name is Raymond Summerlin, and I am joined today, as I am on every single Monday, by the one, the only Freeman Smith, the creator of FAABLab, one of the best waiver wire tools available on Al Gore's internet. So make sure you go check that out at FAABLab.app. We're going to talk about the biggest waiver ads of the week. We're going to talk a little bit about strategy, playoff strategies, some of the players who have hit in the past, and maybe what we can learn about that for the future as we move forward. So a lot to get to today. How are you doing, Freeman?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Pretty thin week, but I think there's some interesting pieces there for a playoff push. So it should be a good strategy talk.
It is interesting as I get to this point, because I write the waiver wire column over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Go check that out on Tuesday. We record this, by the way, on Monday afternoon. So if something happens on Monday Night Football, that we hope that it doesn't. But if something happens on Monday Night Football, that's why we haven't talked about it. But so Tuesday, midday around, that's when the waiver column comes out. And I'm to the point of the season where I've just marked players off that I'm just not going to write about these players anymore, because even though they meet my criteria, my personal criteria is they have to be available in at least 60% of ESPN leagues. Even though they meet that criteria, I'm just not going to write about them anymore. I probably will write again about Jaden Higgins this week, but Devin Neal still didn't really quite get over that hump, which is odd coming off last week. But we just have a lot of inactive leagues. We've got a lot of, if you have a good team and you're still paying attention, you probably don't want to pick up Devin Neal. So it gets tricky to figure out all right, who are we actually targeting? But I looked at the guys, the top names this week, and they are actually available in a lot of leagues. We're talking about 99% available, 98% available. So like you said, it is a thin week. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. But I do think a lot of the guys we'll talk about, even the not in my league degenerates, maybe not TeSlaa. We'll get to TeSlaa later. I know people have been holding on to TeSlaa in the dreams of something hitting all season. But there are some names here that I think we might not actually be rostered in every league. So I do think, even though it's thin, there could be some upside guys here, especially some of the deep cuts that are interesting.
Yeah, I also think sometimes that's how it goes towards the end of the year. These guys that have been recycled over and over, you keep hearing about it, but then they actually pop off at the end of the year. The reason that we keep talking about them is because they're right on the precipice, and they can have that typical post-buy rookie bump, or they can get an injury, can give them more of a target share or something like that. And it just tends to happen towards the end of the season when the teams are getting thinner. So I think, yeah, it definitely is starting to sound a little repetitive, but and maybe it's like a Beetlejuice situation. If we say something 3 times, then they finally actually pop into relevancy.
Yeah, I don't know how many more times I can write about Luther Burden. I don't know how many. I don't know.
It's a good example. This was his best route participation yet, right? So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, but I think people are just looking for an absolute breakout game where it's more often a steady climb to relevancy, and maybe he gets there just in time. But yeah, they got to hurry up if you want to trust him in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that is the concern, is now we've gotten to for the rest of the year, some teams are already locked in the playoffs, obviously. But this week for a lot of teams is win or go home. And so we're in playoff mode from this point on. And then obviously once we get into the proper playoffs in week 15, although some, FFPC, if you're in some of those types of leagues, you're already into that. But as we move on into week 15, 16, 17, we're in playoff mode, win or go home. And that does change the strategy for what you're looking for. I still want to hold on to higher upside stashes where possible, but if you're trying to decide between, all right, I think this guy might be good for a week versus I'm hopeful that this guy gets a role later. Well, later is getting closer and closer on the horizon. You know what I'm saying? We are getting closer and closer to when we actually need those players. And we had that conversation about Chris Rodriguez last week, who I'm coming out of, that game on Sunday night. I'm feeling even better about Chris Rodriguez and the possibility of using him against the Giants in week 15, which is what we talked about. They have another rough game this week against Minnesota. Although, is that really a rough game? Minnesota's run defense has been playing better, but then we saw, if their offense can't do anything, and we'll see
Yeah.
what happens with JJ McCarthy, that might be a good spot for Chris Rodriguez. Again, I will once again write him up as an ad this week, but we can start to have faith in him. But how much faith are we going to put in some of these guys that we're talking about? Which actually brings me to what I wanted to talk about here at the top, which is you have this wonderful database of information from FAABLab, from people, putting in bids and looking back at every single week, especially as you get here at the end of the year, and saying, who were we bidding on at this time last year? Who were we bidding on at this time in 2023? And thinking about, all right, which of these guys were actually successful? Which of these guys were hits? And I was wondering if you went back and looked at any of that information, what trends do you see coming out of that information? Who are the guys that really become, I'm not going to say league winners because I don't think that exists, but that idea of like, all right, this is a guy that if you got him, he really helped you here in the playoffs?
Yeah. So I look at three main things when I'm just looking at like rolling averages based off positions. So it'd be the max single week score that someone had after they were picked up or after they were a FAAB ad, the average for the next 3 weeks. Cause sometimes you're looking for guys who will have big weeks, like boomer bust type streamers. And sometimes you're looking for more consistent performers. And then also just the points per FAAB dollar. So like the pure kind of money ball version of it, where you're just trying to buy points and maybe it's like a flex value or something. And as we get later in the season, you can really see the graph go up on wide receivers and down in the other two positions. So wide receivers get a lot more, their rolling average goes from like 8 points per game over the next 3 up to 11, which is the highest it gets all season. So I think that matches also what we see, right? Like later in the season, you kind of have a better idea of who's a consistent part of the offense. You get these guys who are constantly increasing in their route participation or their target share, the rookies that are emerging and becoming more consistent. So I think it makes a lot of sense that you'd see these wide receivers become higher in their rolling average, but I also see that they get more cost effective too. So like the amount you have to spend to get them is actually hitting the lowest it gets all season. So I think that's interesting because I think at this point we're like swinging for the fences a lot, right? You really want some running back to emerge and save your season, but you're maybe a little less interested in just like the consistent wide receiver. So if you do need some points, you just want to try to improve your flex. I feel like wide receiver is the way to go. And then with the running back stuff, you see such a huge spread. Like the average goes down, but it's driven down so much by just all these wild swings. But then, of course, that one max that you end up getting gets really high on running backs because you end up having like just some sort of handcuff that becomes really relevant in the end. So all this, I think, matches what we see. But I was pretty surprised to see just how valuable these like flex or wide receiver 3 type guys end up being down the stretch.
That's interesting because we focus often on the running backs, the Isaac Guerindos, right? We focus on that type of running back. That wide receiver point is interesting. And we're going to talk about a couple wide receivers, one that really fits kind of what you're talking about, I think, in Devaughn Vele. And we'll talk about him. Yeah. We had him as a deep cut last week, right? So he's been on our radar here for a little while. I do wonder what that means. A guy that we didn't have on the rundown today, but a guy that I do think will be popular this week, just based on what he did on a big stage on Thanksgiving, and that's Dontayvion Wicks, who I assume will be pretty popular. I don't even know if I will have him as an ad in my ad list. I might. We'll see kind of where it goes. But he's in an odd situation in that he has this big game. He is one of those players that when he's on the field, he draws targets. That's what he does. But he plays for a team that their main goal is to run the football. They are not going to be ever a high neutral rate passing team. We think that they are pretty good. They do have a couple, difficult games as we move forward, but we wouldn't expect them to throw a lot. And then they're getting Jaden Reed back, you would assume, this week. They're getting Matthew Golden, you would assume, back this week. They still have, Romeo Doubs. They still have Christian Watson, obviously. And so you look at someone like Dontayvion Wicks, who is going to have, I assume, would be pretty popular this week as an ad, just based on just box score, which again, I'm fine with. I love Dontayvion Wicks as a player. I have not traded him away in any of my dynasty leagues. I'm still hoping against hope that it works out for him. But you look at that and you go, well, I don't know how good that situation is for him versus, again, who we'll talk about later, Devaughn Vele, who also is coming off a big game, but not in the same situation. He plays for the Saints, all that stuff. That's an interesting kind of comparison based on what you're talking about, because I think Devaughn Vele fits more into the type of wide receiver you were mentioning of like, hey, this guy's going to improve and that rolling average is going to be good, even if, maybe we don't get the spike weeks out of him that you would hope maybe we can get out of Wicks just because of the kind of player he is. So it's an interesting kind of thought experiment with those two, I think.
Yeah, and I think the rolling 3 week is good because it kind of accounts for those guys who like mid-season are so obviously mirages, like
Westbrook-Akine, just say his name.
Yeah, who was the Eagles guy? He had a weird name like 3 years ago who was totally irrelevant and then just had like was the number 1 wide receiver for 3 weeks.
I don't remember.
Okay, I'll remember it halfway through. But like those sort of guys, like the Nick Westbrook-Akine types who just you know when it's happening that it's not sustainable, but it doesn't matter if it's the playoffs, right? And so I think like Vele might be one of those guys. They seem like they like him. We'll talk about more once we get into it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you think he's such a talented player. He's going to be a big draft capital guy next year, but if you can just squeeze some more points out of your flex because picking him up for a good playoff schedule is advantageous, then I think he's like the perfect example of this.
That's interesting. I would say for me, a lot of the times this time of year, I am focusing on high upside handcuff running backs. That is normally how I'm trying to build a bench anyway, right? So it's not like this is me changing my stripes, but I do think this is the way that you can get ahead, especially if you're low on FAAB dollars. Like this is where you can spend some money and improve the bench. Like if you're holding on to Tyjae Spears, who's a guy I do like, and I liked him, but like, what is that offense going to be? Even if something happened to Tony Pollard, what's that offense going to be? So like someone like Blake Corum, who we'll talk about a little bit later, Brian Robinson, Tyler Algier, Bashal Tutin, Ray Davis, Samaje Perine, who I also will talk about later. Maybe that's an interesting one in this discussion. When I'm thinking about, all right, how am I going to build my bench for a playoff run? Those are the guys I'm thinking of, rather than, if you look at what Ty Johnson has been doing and think to yourself, hey, he's going to give me some catches and stuff like that. And maybe if you're in a deeper league, then that'll be good. Maybe you just need Ty Johnson for a flex in like a 16-team league, that has like 5 flex spots. I get that. But if we're talking about like a standard league, I'm going to rather take a shot on some of those upside guys, and maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, and maybe they're already on your roster if they become, the hottest waiver ad ahead of week 16, So that's kind of where we are. Producer Matt asked, Quez Watkins, is that where?
No, I got it. Travis Fulgham, yeah.
He was out. He was a popular dynasty guy as well. So
yeah, Old Dominion legend. But yeah, he was like the number 1 wide receiver for 3 weeks. I think he's a good example. No one believed it at the time, but I mean, I'm the same way where I'm always looking for the high upside swings, but it's interesting looking at the data and realizing like, maybe Alec Pierce earlier this year was a better pickup than, I don't know who's some fool's gold we fell for earlier this year. Like it's already Ollie Gordon or something.
Yeah, no, but I loved Alex Pierce, so I'm gonna claim the win on Alex Pierce ultimately here as we get through. By the way, him having that game against in that situation is really a positive sign moving forward. We knew the week before, just based on the way that the Chiefs played defense, it wasn't going to be good for Pierce. But that also should have been true against the Texans, and yet they found him. They got him involved. I think he had the touchdown opportunity against the Chiefs, and if he catches that, then maybe this is a different conversation. So it could just be pure variance. But this week you're liking kind of where he's setting up.
Yeah, totally.
This week. So that's the Alex Pierce conversation. All right, let's get through and talk about a few of these players. I do want to remind you, if you're listening to us now, first of all, we appreciate it. We appreciate the support. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, either in your podcast player of choice or over at YouTube. If you do subscribe to YouTube, click that notification button. You'll get notified whenever we post anything new. We have a bunch of episodes that go up throughout the week. I talk with Rich Rebar on Thursdays about fantasy football, and then we have our big, preview of the entire week to come with Warren Sharp on Fridays. We give out a ton of bets on that. Ryan McChrystal gives out college football bets. Rich Rebar gives out prop bets. We have Joe Gibbs talking about referees and how that might affect the week that's coming up. And then obviously Warren Sharp gives out his best play of the week, which is, I believe, 10-3 now on the year. And so lots of good information on that Friday show. So make sure you subscribe wherever you find that. And as I mentioned at the top, head over to FAABLab if you're trying to figure out, all right, how much do I need to spend on any of these guys? FAABLab is the place to go. FAABLab.app. FAAB LAB.app. There we go. Nailed it, I think. I got it?
Yes, got it right. I think it's going to be the easiest thing to pronounce, considering the players we have on the docket. So it's good.
I was going to say we do have a lot of fun players this week on the names. I'm very happy with the names that we ended up with this week as we go through it. The first name, and we saw this unfortunately happen on Thanksgiving. We saw Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, the fun name committee just keeps delivering here as we go. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we saw him go down with an ankle injury. The Lions are playing again on Thursday, so it's not like they have an extra long period as you normally would after a Thursday night game. Amon-Ra St. Brown did not practice on Monday. Every indication is we're not going to see him against the Cowboys. Obviously, Jameson Williams is there. We know that Jameson Williams will be a focal point of the offense. Jahmyr Gibbs will be a focal point. But behind that, with Sam Laporta on injured reserve, it opens up a lot of opportunities. One of those opportunities, the guy we've already mentioned, who is Isaac TeSlaa, who we have seen in flashes. He even caught a touchdown in that game on Thanksgiving, but he's available in 99% of ESPN leagues. A lot of people in Dynasty, a lot of people in deep leagues have been waiting for that opportunity. It seems like we're going to get that opportunity now, but I'll tell you, and I'll talk about more maybe where I stand. I don't know how excited I am about this. Even, going up against Cowboys, what we expect to be a shootout, that probably will just get me over the edge of saying, all right, yeah, here we are. But there are lots of little things about his profile this year that I don't know how excited I am about this. How do you feel about TeSlaa?
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty hesitant overall, just because I think it's a 1 week, 2 week thing. It didn't seem too serious for Amon-Ra. And yeah, he seemed like a good prospect. I was kind of surprised he wasn't getting more hype preseason. Like the way people talked about him when he was kind of getting hyped up when he had some crazy catch in the preseason or something, right? And it was like this fun thing. Like, what if it happens for him? But he was a 3rd round draft pick, so it shouldn't have been such a crazy long shot, like a 3rd round draft pick on a good passing team. So I like him. I thought he was good, and he looks the part when you see him on the field. He doesn't seem like he is going to be involved enough, and you think like this injury would open the door for him. But it seems like every time there's an injury or something happens, Dan Campbell just gives Khalif Raymond like a 80% route share or something. So I kind of feel like because they're in such a dire position right now, the Bears are number 1 in the NFC, and they really need to win. I feel like they're not going to focus too much on developing TeSlaa's rookie game, and instead just try to have someone like Khalif Raymond come in and be that veteran presence until Amon-Ra's healthy, which could be 1 week. They'll have a long it's Thursday this week, right? And then Sunday the week after, right? So I think by then it'll probably be Amon-Ra's back in the lineup, and TeSlaa will go back to irrelevancy. But otherwise he does check the boxes though, being a rookie, wide receiver, good passing offense, getting the opportunity. So I definitely wouldn't fault someone for taking a shot on him. But I also think when there's a primetime injury or a high profile game like that, kind of inflates the value.
And I mean, he gets the Cowboys. And to your point, we don't know if Khalif Raymond is going to play because he missed last week. Brock Wright missed last week. So we'll see what happens with those injuries. Unfortunately, again, we record this on Monday, so we don't know about a lot of these injuries yet. That's the thing. But I do agree with you. We even saw in that game, Tom Kennedy, who has spent time in the past with the Lions, ended up with 4 targets to just 2 for TeSlaa. And to your point, it is always been interesting how obviously he is a bigger prospect. He's 6'4", 214 pounds. He ran a 4.43, got a 39.5-foot vertical jump. And he got drafted in the 3rd round. Dynasty people who play dynasty fantasy football have obviously been all over TeSlaa for all of those reasons for a long time. So it's not like he's under the radar. But you're right, like from a redraft perspective, it wasn't there just because we didn't know if the targets were going to show up. And what I will say is this past week we did get, obviously with Amon-Ra leaving pretty early, we got a career high in routes with 30 from him. We got a career high in route participation rate with 96.8. We also tied his career high in targets, but like I said, that was only 2. And we just haven't seen much evidence that he's going to earn targets in this offense as throughout the year. Now, that has been with Amon-Ra St. Brown healthy, Sam Laporta healthy for most of the year, Jameson Williams healthy, obviously Jahmyr Gibbs role. So he's had a lot of target competition. So it wouldn't be that shocking if suddenly he becomes more involved in the offense, especially now that they know that Amon-Ra is not going to play this week. They're going to spend some time maybe figuring out how to use him better. But if you just look at how many targets he's drawn when he's been on the field, it just hasn't been that high. He's 107th out of 113 wide receivers with at least 150 routes and yards per route, and 112th in target rate per route. He's only been targeted on 7.1% of his routes so far this year. And then you go back to that game on Thanksgiving and you say, all right, well, he got his real opportunity. Amon-Ra wasn't there. Well, he had 2 targets on 30 routes, 6.7%. So I have concerns about what this is going to look like. But the matchup against the Cowboys is so good. He is a big play guy. If he gets a target, we have some expectations it's going to be a longer play. And we've also seen him just be a touchdown scorer. We made that crazy catch. And was it week 1 he made that crazy catch and people got excited?
It was week 1, on the sideline, corralling it in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I'm not going to, he's going to be an ad for me. Like he will be in the column. There's no question about that. I think that he's an ad. If you're really desperate, go out there and get it. But I do wonder if he's disappointed. If we get to the end of that game on Thursday and someone like Tom Kennedy or Khalif Raymond, or if he's healthy, or Brock Wright, if he's healthy, or somebody like that steps up and gets more targets than TeSlaa, and people are just like, well, this is disappointing. Right. And I do think that's not even like that would be shocking. That's well within the realm of possibilities that's what this ends up as.
Yeah. But overall, I think bullish on the Lions passing offense. Jared Goff's been really good lately relative for fantasy, and they've played in a dome like every game but one the rest of the season. Right. So the defense looks pretty atrocious. So it should be shootouts. So if something were to happen, if Amon-Ra, it turns out is more hurt or Jameson gets hurt or something like that, I think, I think the passing offense is like ideal. And so because of that, you do have a lot of outs for TeSlaa. But I'm picturing it's a Khalif Raymond 4 for 72 game, and then TeSlaa's maybe has 2 receptions, 12 yards, and a touchdown or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, which good enough. If that's the way it comes up, that's good enough. Yeah, their one non-dome game, I believe, is at Chicago in Week 18.
Okay, so
then it's Week 18, so we don't.
Yeah, so just domes the rest of the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, TeSlaa is on the exclusive list, though, that my mom keeps of players to draft next year because she's not a big football fan, but she is in a fantasy league. And whenever we're watching a primetime game, someone makes a big catch, she'll say, "Who was that guy?" And she puts the note in her phone. And I know she's drafting him next year. And I think that is a harbinger of a player being overvalued because the moment it enters my mom's 2026 draft list, I think that you're going to have to give a little more FAAB than you want.
My sister got into a work fantasy league, not this season, but this past season before 2024, and for some reason did not contact me at all for help during the draft. She sent me, she goes, "Hey, I drafted this team. Do you think it's any good?" And she had drafted it was Jake Funk when he was with the Rams.
Oh yeah,
he had drafted him and it was wild. It was like the 8th round. I go, "Why did you draft Jake Funk?" She goes, "I don't know. I liked his name." And I said, "Fair enough." That was her only foray into fantasy football. And so there we go. All right, let's talk about another wide receiver. I wonder. I try not to look at anybody else's waiver list until I'm finished, just to make sure I'm not being, I guess, influenced by the consensus. I will have Devaughn Vele ahead of TeSlaa on my list this week. I feel pretty confident in that. And I wonder if that will be the consensus. Vele available in 99.4% of ESPN leagues. He was one of our deep cuts last week. So again, he's been on our radar. This is a guy that's been running a lot of routes. He had been getting targets. He had 7 targets in week 12. We saw those targets connect, obviously, in week 13. He had a big game, and it was a touchdown, 93 yards. As we talked about last week, we saw flashes from him with the Broncos. That whole passing game behind Cortland Sutton last year was so kind of, it was just mix and match, and whoever got a big week one week was not even used the next week. So we didn't see consistency, but we did see some flashes. I think he's a really good compliment for Chris Olave. And so I kind of put all that together and I go, yeah, I think this is the guy. Is he going to be like super flashy? Am I expecting him to even have as big of a game as he had this past week again this season? Maybe not, but I do think targets are going to be there. And if you just really need a flex for the rest of the way, I think he's interesting. I would rather have, if you don't need a starter, you just need a bench stash, I'd rather have Luther Burden, right? But if you need somebody to score points this week, I'm pretty interested in Devaughn Vele just based on the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, he's had his 3 biggest target shares in the 3 games that Shaheed's been gone. So I think it's pretty obvious what happened. And it's pretty obvious the Saints like sought him out and wanted to get him involved. I mean, he got traded for a 4th and a 7th, which is essentially what George Pickens got traded for, right? Pickens was a 3rd, Bailey was a 4th and a 7th, which, I mean, we could criticize it all we want, but it means that they obviously liked him and wanted him to be a real part of their offense. And so
I have to say, before anybody yells, there are salary cap differences. And
yeah.
Contract. We got it.
But yeah, so he is obviously going to be involved, I think. And the Saints run a lot of plays. They have a really good schedule coming up. It's Bucks, Panthers, Jets, Titans. So yeah, I think he makes a lot of sense. I think he's kind of exactly what I was talking about, where it's like a hold your nose and take a 4-point upgrade in your flex rather than a high upside guy. But you never know. He actually does have big playability too. So I could see him catching a long touchdown or something like that. I think overall he's good value pick too. I feel like, I mean, what would you have to spend to get him? 5% at most, probably less, 2%. So yeah, I think I'd be into him depending on the situation. It does get tough this time of year though, because you gotta, if you can handcuff your own running backs, or maybe you have to like roster another defense to account for playoff matchups. You know, if you have like the Broncos D or something, they don't have a good matchup one week. So I think you're starting to get a little more thin at bench going into the playoffs. So it's very situational. But if you could just upgrade your flex, I think he's a good option.
Yeah, I do think he's one of those guys that if I am picking him up to put him in my starting lineup, I feel better about that than picking him up to put him on my bench.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I think that's kind of the difference. Where the thing with TeSlaa is I feel it's kind of the same situation, because as you said, if you're not playing him this week in this matchup, then Amon-Ra comes back in week 15, then what did you get out of even picking him up? So I think it's actually a pretty similar situation where if I'm picking this guy up to put him in my flex spot, I'd rather have Vele than I would TeSlaa, just because of I have those concerns about what the usage will be. By the way, TeSlaa going for 120 and 3 touchdowns on Thursday night, which I hope happens. I like to see fantasy points, and I hope it works out for everybody. But like that would be, you're saying, all right, well, I would rather Vele in that situation than if you're talking about, well, I just need this guy on my bench. I already mentioned him. Luther Burden would be higher on my list for something like that. And there are probably some other players that are slipping my mind. Some of those running backs would be higher that we talked about earlier on my list. And so it is one of those tricky situations as you get here to the year. And you mentioned you have to think about where you are in league. So I'm in a 14-team league, which you would say, well, that's pretty deep, but we only have 4 bench spots, and it's 2 quarterback league. And so you have to keep 3 quarterbacks really if you want to play, if you want to be successful. For instance, I have Jackson Dart in that league. He's going to go on bye this coming up week. So, you have those concerns. And so then you only really have 3 roster spots to play with, and you're probably not going to spend one of them on, Vele. You're probably not even spending one of those on Burden if you have a good team. Like my 4th wide receiver that never gets to play is either Cortland Sutton or Tetairoa McMillan. That's kind of where we are. And so it's you have to just play what your league is. But in general, if I need somebody to play in the flex, I'm really, really interested in Vele. And I definitely and will have Vele ahead of TeSlaa in the column again for better or worse. We'll see how this works out.
Yeah, and I think you got to be strategic too. Like, if your team's really good, maybe you want to protect that floor a bit. You know, if you have Jonathan Taylor, maybe you want to get Giddens or somebody like that, rather than trying to, have a handcuff of another player or a lottery ticket back or something like that. I think we're always saying go for upside. But if you have a bye and you just need to win 2 games to get a championship, I mean, it's worth it to think about doing the opposite and trying to raise your floor.
One more thing, and because I looked this up as I was, obviously researching for Vele, is Tyler Shuck is second in dropbacks over the last 2 weeks. Second overall.
Yeah, that's a good stat because I feel like people just ignore the Saints offense, and I mean, yeah, it's Kellen Moore. Like it's going to be, they're going to move the ball pretty quick. They're going to pass a lot, and the defense isn't very good. So overall, it's a good situation. But just because you have a 45-year-old rookie quarterback, that doesn't seem like he was worth the second-round pick.
How
people,
how dare you?
Do you think there's any chance they go back to Rattler?
No, I don't. I think this is where we are. Yeah. All right, one more to talk about here, and this I mentioned him at the beginning. This fits more of that pure stash because it seems like Kyren Williams is fine. Although I do think talking about Blake Corum, and the reason we would talk about him a little more in depth this week is because Kyren Williams left that game with an ankle injury. He came back and he played in the second half. Also, he played way more in the second half than Blake Corum did. That's not actually that surprising. That's how this split has worked for most of the year. If the Rams are in a close game or trailing, they haven't been trailing a ton, but if they're trailing or in a close game, it's been a lot more Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams has 72.7% of the backfield carries when the Rams are winning by fewer than 7 points or trailing since the bye week. Since the bye week, Williams has like 55% of the backfield carries when they're leading by 7 or more. And so that's a pretty normal thing that we've seen happen. So it looked like the normal rotation. But I will say, ankle injuries are tricky for running backs. You can come out of that game and played, and then the adrenaline wears off, and you go, all right, I realize this was worse. Even though the Rams lost that game, they're definitely going to the playoffs. They're definitely one of the best teams. They could look to rest Williams. There's lots of avenues here for Corum to just get playing time this week. But even more than that, I think if we're talking about Corum as an ad, we're just talking about him being one of those upside stashes. We know that this guy would be the guy in a good offense, an offense that we want to target for a good team that's going to be in positive game script more often than not. If something happened to Kyren Williams and that ankle injury ahead of halftime, that's just a good reminder of kind of what the upside is that Corum holds in this offense.
Yeah, and I think it's like, as far as handcuffs go, it's got to be the most plug-in play handcuff in the league, right? I mean, even like Tyler Algier to Bijan isn't quite the same play style, but it seems like Corum is really almost like a Kyren clone that McVay is just keeping on ice in case he needs him. And he looked pretty good this week, but I was looking at the stats. So they're both averaging 4.7 yards per carry. They both have their longest run of the season's 34 yards. And just when I watched them play, they seem so similar. It seemed like Corum maybe has a little more juice, but I think Kyren does some stuff that McVay likes and just has the trust. But Kyren's had below 70% rush share in the last 6 games. So it's starting to get more like a true split. And if he's got an ankle injury, I could see it being more 50-50. But like you said, you'd want Corum more in these blowout games. And they've got good running back matchups, but they don't have blowout matchups, right? So it doesn't seem like they're going to be up 27-3 and just grinding out clock. There's a couple in there, maybe. You never know. The Rams are really good, but it seems like they will be in relatively competitive games and probably want to play Kyren a lot. So I think it is more of a true handcuff, but I think it's one of the most valuable handcuffs left on the waiver wire. So I think this is worth it, especially if you are a team that's maybe just missing one piece, like you're going into the playoffs and this could be the difference for you. I think that would be a high profile ad. I do think it's probably going to be pretty pricey this time of year. People just are going to blow the rest of their fab on a guy who might save their season. Comes out in a couple of days that Kyren's not practicing or something. So I think you have to pay up for it, but I think this could be worth it if you're somebody who really needs that variance.
The good news is that all the news we've heard about the injury first of all, obviously Kyron came back into the game. That's the first thing that'll keep the price down. And then all the news we heard on Monday, Kyron said that he's good and they expect him to practice this week. So all of the news is good on Kyron, which means I don't know how much you'll actually have to pay for him. And again, we're talking about him because running back is so thin. Obviously, Chris Rodriguez is still out there. I'd rather Chris Rodriguez from after what we saw, on Sunday night. And so there are names out there, but it is really thin at running back. And I do think you have some reasons to be interested, at least in Corum. To your point about, having more juice, Corum has been very explosive this season. I don't know how much people have been paying attention to it, but we've had a lot of success just betting over longest run with Blake Corum because he doesn't consistently get carries. And again, as we saw in the second half of that game against the Panthers, if the Rams go down, they trust Kyron Williams more as a pass blocker in the passing games. You're not going to see Corum really play a ton of snaps. But among all running backs with at least 75 touches this season, that's 51 running backs, Corum is third in the rate of runs to gain at least 5 yards. And he is first among all of those running backs in the rate of runs to gain at least 10 yards. He has been a very explosive running back. Part of that's a situation. Part of that's, where he's getting the carries and things like that. I don't know if it would be exactly the same if he was playing in more of the Kyron Williams role. But he also has just been, they've traded series at times. And so he has just been that I'm getting a carry on first down kind of running back at different times as well. And so, yeah, I like Blake Corum. I like his kind of long-term upside here. We'll see. Kyron obviously got a new contract, so it's not as exciting maybe from a dynasty prospect as it may have looked in June. But yeah, I like Corum, and I think that he is one of the higher upside handcuffs available. But also, there are a lot of those kinds of guys. We talked about him at the beginning. I'll go back to my list. Brian Robinson Jr. really stands out. Tyler Algier stands out. Bashal Tutin, we saw him get back involved again this week after it seemed like Etienne had sent him to the shadow realm. We saw Tutin come back and get more involved this week. Ray Davis, right? He stands out. And so lots of those kinds of guys that you can add to the back of your bench and, be at least pretty excited about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think any of those are basically the same, right? And so if you're somebody who's got a lot of FAAB and you can afford to go for Blake Corum, I think maybe it's worth it. But yeah, like you said, you could basically just roll the dice on the other ones if you're somebody who's already spent it all and just needs to pick up someone for free.
If you maybe took our advice and spent a lot of money on Tyrone Tracy, although we'll see how it works out on Monday night, but that worked out. It's been working out better as of late. Tracy, we're coming back, Tyrone Tracy. All right, let's get to the deep cuts again. A section that featured Devaughn Vele last week. We've had a lot of those kind of deep cuts. They end up hitting and looking a lot better. So pay attention to these guys. If you're in deeper leagues, definitely go and pick these guys up. Some of these guys might already be rostered. The guy that you put in the show sheet as your deep cut, I would guess is not rostered anywhere.
This was my deepest ever cut.
And I really am very interested in where you're coming from here with this guy.
Okay, so this is just me watching the Texans game and seeing that the Texans were running this tush push with Cade Stover a lot.
Interesting.
And so I was thinking, I think he had 4 carries. They were all like this tush push. And I never really got why more teams don't do this, right? Like the Chiefs, for example, they won't sneak with Mahomes because he dislocated his knee like 5 years ago or something. But you don't need to use your quarterback in that situation, especially if you're telegraphing it. Why not have Noah Gray for that situation? And I think that's what the Texans are doing. So CJ Stroud's coming off an injury and they don't want to get him injured. So they're having Cade Stover on the tush push. And if you don't have a tight end, any chance you could just kind of Taysom Hill your way into a 2 touchdown, no receptions, 3 yards game for Cade Stover?
I mean, we're digging deep. I guess that's what this section is for. I looked at because I was so confused why we were even talking about him. He ran 6 routes, but you're right. Yeah, he is that tush push guy. We saw Mark Andrews get a touchdown out of it, right?
Yeah.
It was not like your traditional tush push. It was kind of a variation on it. AJ Barner's gotten some touchdowns, I believe, on Seattle's version of it. And so it does seem like teams are using the tight ends there. And if Stover's that guy, yeah, maybe it's there. I don't think the Texans have had, and this is off the top of my head, I don't believe the Texans have had a ton of success near the goal line this year. And so this could be one of their ways to try to get better. Obviously, with their defense is so good that they just need their offense to be fine for them to be a competitive team. And just scoring when they get the opportunity to do so could be it. So there you go. I mean, we tried it with Taysom Hill last week already with with Kamara going down, and that didn't work out. But yeah, I mean,
maybe he's more of a plus 3,000 first to score type guy. I think that's where the value might be.
Now you're talking my language. I'll be sending a Slack note to our first touchdown rider, Will Morrow. I'll be sending a Slack note to him after we hang up here. I'm now very interested. You
okay, nice.
You have piqued my interest.
I can't, in good conscience, recommend anyone actually picks up Cade Stover and starts it. But if he does have a tush push touchdown this week, then we could talk.
Yeah, then we'll have some fun. I have a couple guys here. I've already mentioned Samaje Perine, and kind of as part of that handcuff, he came back from injury. He was immediately again a thorn in Chase Brown's side. 33 snaps, 16 touches, just one fewer carry. We did see Chase Brown retain his passing game role, which is interesting. Perine is we've talked about this, I think, before. Perine's an odd player because when if I'm remembering correctly, the scouting report on him when he came out of Oklahoma was not that he was going to be this passing down kind of guy. And then he turned into that in the NFL, and good on him to work to develop that part of his game. But then we see him come back, and he wasn't used there. If we still saw Chase Brown run more routes and get more targets. I believe Chase Brown had 7 targets in that game. So that's interesting. Brown has been good. He continues to be efficient. He was efficient against the Ravens. So I don't think, Perine's coming for his job or anything. But it is worth noting that Perine is back. He's playing a lot of snaps, and it would be interesting to see in this offense with Joe Burrow back. Hopefully they get T. Higgins back this week. We'll kind of see how that goes. I believe he was still in the protocol as of Monday. But in this offense, that's at least interesting. I think we can add him to the list. He's a tier below like a Brian Robinson Jr. or Ray Davis, but we can add him to that kind of list with like Isaiah Davis or somebody like that, where, all right, if I'm just trying to fill out a deep league bench, I do think he's an interesting name. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think, he's a little more boring than some of those guys, but their schedule's amazing too. Like if something were to happen to Chase Brown, I don't think that the contingent value is that much lower than Ray Davis stepping in for James Cook necessarily, because the schedule is so ideal that I think, and they definitely need to get something going in the run game, and they need to pass block for Burrow, so they're going to have somebody back there. So I think it's just one of those situations where it seems ugly because it's Perine, but I think actually he might be deserving of being in that same level as those other handcuffs that we don't necessarily know if they would be productive given an injury to the guy ahead of him. I think he's probably a lower ceiling just based off his athletic abilities, but I think he's still just workload wise in the schedule is a pretty good pick. Borderline should be in the top 3 rather than a deep cut, I'd say.
Yeah, I believe he's going to be on my official ads this week. I think he will be. Obviously I have to fill it out. We'll see kind of where we are. I have one more for you. If you had to guess which Bills wide receiver ran the most routes this past week, who would be your guess?
Okay. How about non-scratched Keon Coleman?
No, not Keon Coleman. It's a good guess.
No, I know the answer, so I'll ruin the illusion for the listener.
It's Gabriel Davis, Mr. Gabe Davis. Can I first say that it's criminal that the Bills are where they are with receiver at on a team with Josh Allen at quarterback, that this is what they've given him at receiver, but it is what it is. Gabe Davis led. I got Gabe, and then we got into Diggs somehow. And we ended up with Gibbs. I don't know how we got there. The ghosts of Buffalo Bills receivers passed, but Gabe Davis led all Bills receivers with a 70.4% route rate in Week 13. Since his first game in Week 11, only Khalil Shakir has run more routes among receivers than Davis. We did have a bit of an odd situation against the Steelers because the Bills ran so much to tight end. The Bills played nearly half their snaps with multiple tight ends against the Steelers. The 5 weeks before that, they were at the bottom third of the league in multiple tight end formations. We'll have to see if that's something that continues. And by the way, they did that without Dalton Kincaid, and we expect Dalton Kincaid to come back and obviously be a big part of the offense. So like there's a lot of moving parts here. We saw Keon Coleman score a touchdown. Can he get back in the good graces? Tons of moving parts here. But the one thing that is true is the Bills need a reliable outside wide receiver. Davis has been that for Allen in the past. His route rate has climbed from 45.5% in his first game to 60% in the second game to 70.4% this past week in his third game. That looks like a wide receiver ad. Their schedule's not great. So, it's, we'll see kind of where it goes. They get the Bengals and Patriots. That's pretty good, right, as we go. But then they get the Browns and the Eagles after that, and obviously the 2 money weeks. So I don't know what it comes to. If you're a good team, you probably have better options. But you just look at kind of everything going here. It's possible that Gabe Davis is the number 1 outside receiver for the rest of the year in a Josh Allen offense. And I'm like, I guess we kind of got to pick him up and see what happens there. So that's my Gabe Davis, I guess, case. And you can probably tell from the way that I've made it. I don't know how strongly I feel about it, but it is there.
Yeah, no Cade Stover, but I mean, you make good points, and it's funny how quickly we forget. Like he was such a fantasy darling in his third year, I think, or second year. But I don't know. The fact that he's running so many routes and not earning targets makes me think he's
not ideal.
Good.
Yeah,
and not ideal. You talked about ghosts of receivers past. I think that we have one coming back next week in Brandon Cooks, right? So maybe he's the real.
I didn't even mention Brandon Cooks. Yeah, like they added him. They got rid of Samuel, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Kincaid's what's going on with his injury? Is he coming back next week? You think?
I'm pretty sure because he got in limited practices at the end of last week. There was some thought that he would be back this past week. So I would assume that means that he's going to be back this week. We would think.
Yeah. So I mean, it all makes sense. My problem with it is just he has even if he has a big next 2 weeks or something, like week 16 in your fantasy championship, are you going to be starting? Who is it? It's Eagles and then
it's Browns and then Eagles.
Browns,
I believe.
Eagles,
I mean, 16, 17.
If you're desperate, I guess, but imagine starting Gabe Davis against the Browns and he goes for 1 reception, 13 yards. Like, but I don't know. It checks all the boxes. I think it's actually a good example of what we started the show with, where sometimes you just got to hold your nose on these wide receivers and try to ride the wave. It might just be he might end up getting really involved for a couple weeks and be valuable. And if so, I think it definitely makes sense, but I wouldn't bet on it.
I have to correct myself. It is Elijah Moore who they cut because and Curtis Samuel's on injured reserve. That's what I was remembering. So there you go.
Elijah Moore.
Elijah. Do you remember Jets Elijah Moore? Remember how
fun it was like, why did they draft Garrett Wilson? They have Elijah Moore.
Yeah.
It was like such a crazy. I think he had over 1,000 yards. Everybody loved him in Dynasty, and then that was
to the Browns. That didn't work out, and now here we are. I hope it works out for you, Elijah Moore. It started so promisingly. It wasn't 1,000 yards. It was 538. It was in 11 games.
Okay, maybe I was thinking on pace for or something.
He had 5 touchdowns.
My memory of that, okay, maybe it's the touchdowns. My memory is that he had like a much better season than that, but maybe it's the touchdowns that got me thinking.
He has a career 57.3% catch rate. That's not ideal.
No.
It's not ideal, Elijah, but I'm rooting for you. It's not like, aside this year, right? This year he's played with a good quarterback. Prior to this year, the quarterback situations he had with the Jets and the Browns, not ideal. So we'll see. We'll see kind of where we end up. All right, that's enough for us. We don't need to dissect free agent wide receiver Elijah Moore's. I actually don't know if he's ended up somewhere else on a practice squad or not yet. We don't have to dissect him. We don't have to dissect Brandon Cooks and what we're going to get out of him as we move forward. If he ends up being the savior of the Buffalo Bills, we'll see. We'll find out as we go. That's it for us. Make sure you subscribe wherever you find us. We really do appreciate the support. Remember, we got the fantasy show on Thursday. We've got the preview show on Friday. Freeman and I'll be back again to record next Monday, talking about week 15 as we get into the fantasy playoffs for almost every league. So make sure you stick around and listen to that. Also, head over to FAABLab.app, tell you how much to bid for all of these guys, for TeSlaa, for for Vele, for Gabe Davis. Put Gabe Davis on the list just for me and see how much you have to bid. 0% is the answer to that question. So make sure you head over to FAABLab.app and check that out. And we'll be back to talk with you really soon.